Welcome everyone to this session where Paul and I have the pleasant task of announcing our LERA award winners for this year, and for all of you to get to see what they look like and to hear from them. And it's something we're really going to try to do in the next hour, is have you actually hear from them and maybe have the time to ask some questions, but at least you can all use chat. So we've put it in 3 parts, or 2 parts really, but we have our research winners and our practitioners. So let me, without further ado, turn it over to Paul for the research winners.
Okay, let me just make sure my I've got our slides up here. So the first award is the Susan C. Eaton Outstanding Scholar-Practitioner Award. And the awardee this year is Jonathan Booth of the London School of Economics and Political Science. And just by way of sort of orientation, we have asked the awardees to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about their work. So first up will be Jonathan Booth. Jonathan?
Hi, how's everyone doing?
Good.
Great. So if you've listened to my little clip online that I've left, you know that it's a tremendous honor to be named the 2020 Dunlop Scholarly Award winner. It has meant a lot to me, and just to tell you a story about how much it means to me, when receiving the news, I was actually on the London Tube, okay? So here I'm going to work on the London Tube, and then I looked at my email, I'm like, well, this is a joke. This is not legitimate. I had to read it 3 times to realize that this was serious, you know? And so once it dawned on me, oh, I got a little bit emotional, and at first I went, yay, it was more like a yelp. And everyone on the tube heard it. They knew that something was coming out of me. But then, you know, as I began to process and to think about what does this mean, and to know that I'm being honored alongside all the previous winners who I admire and respect, it really, I don't have the words to express my gratitude and appreciation. So I want to say thank you. That little yelp ended up into like a little teary, happy cry on the tube. That wasn't pleasant either. But anyway, what amazed me is who knew this could happen to that little gay kid from Meridian, Mississippi. So I have a lot of thank yous because without you, I would not be here today. So I'd like to thank LERA and Paul and Janice and the committee, to all the membership, to Bernadette and Emily for their support. I have to say a big thank you to my University of Minnesota family, where I earned my PhD, the faculty, the staff, the students, my PhD cohort. I have to really thank John Budd, Teresa Glom, who I worked with very closely, as well as Mike Bagnano, who you all probably know. I have to thank my current employer, my LSE family, especially my ER-HR faculty research group, the Department of Management, the school itself. Without their support and friendship, I would definitely not be here. I have to thank all my collaborators because I'd be foolish not to. And I'd like to thank my family, my friends, my husband, Marty, our son, Tom. And if this list is not inclusive, I apologize. As Hillary Clinton has suggested, it takes a village. And if I've missed anyone, you're part of my village. So thank you. I appreciate it. So I've been asked to share my most significant piece of research and the contribution that it makes. Now, upon thinking about this, I was like, what would you consider that, Jonathan? And so I went, well, let's go to the citations and see what the citations might say, right? And so I looked at the citations, and it took me to my first published paper ever. And I think John Budd is in the audience. He can tell you all a story later about, it's a funny story, about how he almost discouraged me from pursuing this, but I'm so glad that I did pursue it, because it's led me to have this great trajectory looking at pro-social behavior within and external to the organization. This paper is called Employer-Supported Volunteering Benefits Gift Exchange Among Employers, Employees, and Volunteer Organization, which was written by me, Kyung-Won Park, and Teresa Glom. So, pre-2009, it's probably pre-2007. I was reading in the literature. John and I had purchased a data set from Canada, the National Data Set on Giving and Volunteering, and we were hoping to answer a different question, but because the union membership question, we couldn't really identify if those individuals were truly a member or were they actually a member of a professional organization or something of that nature. And so I said, it's unfortunate that we have this great data. And so I began to look at the constructs, and then those constructs led me to begin reading the literature that's related to employer-supported volunteering and corporate volunteering. And pre-2007, the literature was largely anecdotal, but also it was atheoretical. And I was like, well, this is an important question. Questions related to employer-supported volunteering and corporate volunteering are important because employers are getting their employees to help deliver their CSR, objectives, practices, policies, etc. So I then began to look at that data and then began to hypothesize using theoretical underpinning of gift exchange and social exchange to explain the benefits that can accrue to various stakeholders if employers provide these programs, these corporate programs or supported volunteering benefits. And briefly, what we found is that if employers can provide these benefits, it does increase volunteering. Employees perceive that they gain skills, and through enhanced volunteering and gaining skills, employees feel more successful in the job and are recognized by their employer. And again, you might say, well, that's kind of straightforward. That makes sense. But seriously, this had not been documented empirically in the literature, nor had there been theory applied to these types of questions. So this was not only the first theoretical, I should say one of the first, I hate to say first, it was one of the first theoretical applications and operationalization of these employer-supported volunteering benefits. And as I said earlier, if organizations can offer these benefits, they perhaps not only can benefit the community. I'm hearing feedback, I think.
You are, but I don't think it's feedback. So maybe more people should be put on mute or something.
Okay. But anyway, my point is that not only are they benefiting the community, they're benefiting their employees, but they can obviously benefit themselves in various ways and have their employees actually engaged in delivering their CSR programs. So this first piece of work
Stop a moment. Can I ask everybody to put their microphone on mute in the lower left corner, because we are getting something from someone. Bernadette, can you hear that? Sure. Jonathan, just talk loudly, go over it.
Janice, I think it might be Lera Zoom 1, and I think you can mute it on your end.
Can mute what?
It's all good.
I think Bernadette just did it. Go ahead, thank you.
Okay, so basically this paper was my first baby. It's led to many citations. It's led me to a trajectory of working in this particular area. It's led me to study union membership and giving in the community, looking from a social capital theoretical lens, where we find actually union members as compared to never been a member actually are more likely to give to charitable causes and give more, and free riders give less and have a tendency to give less. So those are interesting stories. We've investigated questions of volunteering, corporate volunteering climates and how they emerge. Are they led by the employer? Are they led by the employees? We find that both matter, and that actually these climates not only benefit their volunteering employees, but also benefit those that don't volunteer at all. So I have many more papers that we could discuss. I don't think we have the time, but I'm just to let you know that this was the impetus initiating my career pursuing this type of research question, looking at pro-social behavior within and outside the firm.
Okay, well, thank you, Jonathan. Before I introduce the next speaker, I did want to say a word or two about the person that the award is named after. Many of us in LERA knew Susan Eaton. She was the consummate scholar practitioner. She worked at the AFL-CIO for many years, did her doctoral degree at MIT, was working at Harvard at the time of her untimely death. And it's one of the, I think, the neatest things we've done in LERA, that we've been honoring Susan's contributions over the years. So with that said, our second awardee is John McCarthy from Cornell. John?
Yep. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Janice. Thank you to the LERA community, to my colleagues at Cornell. Many of you I see are tuned in today. Thank you to my colleagues at Rutgers as well. I also remember where I was when I received this award. I was honestly, I was changing a diaper, and I had the phone right next to the changing pad, and I saw, it gives you the kind of preview of what the email is, and I saw the award come through, and I screamed out to my wife, Heather, and I basically abandoned diaper duty and had her come in and finish while I went and kind of cheered and celebrated. So that's the story about when I received the award, but sincere thank you to LERA and to the broader ILR community. I see Tom is here too. Thank you, Tom, as well, for everything you've done for this community and for my career as well. So rather than talking about one specific paper, my research ties together, and I thought I would talk briefly about kind of the totality of some of this work. One of my primary interests and areas of contribution has come from trying to unpack the specific ways that labor management partnerships shape social processes within organization systems, including relationship patterns within and between work sites. In a sense, I've tried to unpack the underlying mechanisms, particularly social mechanisms, through which partnerships affect organizational outcomes, employee outcomes. And my interests here include relational patterns between the upper levels of the organization, what Koch and Katz and McCarthy might call the strategic level, but extend to include processes and relational patterns within and between work sites as well, that is kind of on the front lines. And public K-12 education has been a really fruitful area for this research project for a few reasons. One, because of the way that schools are structured, where we have a central district office where upper leadership resides, and we also have lower level semi-autonomous schools with principals, with building reps, with faculty. It's an organizational structure that in some ways is not unlike many contemporary firms, at least unionized firms. Second, it's a fruitful setting because public education is such a vital, public good, and there have been long-standing debates around how to improve public schools, and really for decades, public school reform has brought about a lot of friction between, teachers unions, administrators, parents, policymakers, and various other stakeholders in public education, and there have been plenty of disagreements over how to improve teaching quality and learning for children. Going back roughly a decade ago, Saul Rubinstein, who I'm truly honored to share this virtual stage with, we found that within some school districts and some schools throughout the country, union leaders, school administrators were finding an alternative path to reform, one that was based on building strong relationships, facilitating collaboration among educators, and collaboration that was focused on teaching quality, on school improvement. So our earliest research here was largely qualitative, and it was grounded or motivated in a desire to understand how these districts had built and maintained these partnerships over time. And a few themes stuck out to me over this initial research that very much carry forward to today and inform and motivate the types of things that I've looked at more recently. We found, for example, that in high partnership schools, there tended to be, first of all, we conducted a rather large social network analysis going back to around 2011 or 2012, where we we mapped communication patterns between all educators in these districts. It was a very large data collection effort that involved participation from building reps, from principals, from faculty. And it appeared from this early work that partnership shaped communication structures and topics within schools and between schools. Schools with high partnerships, for example, tended to have denser communication networks. That is, more teachers were communicating with one another around problem solving, around school improvement. Interestingly, the building representatives, right? So the union reps in these schools were highly central in these communication networks. They were involved in problem solving and school improvement oriented communication. They interacted more frequently. They interacted more informally with their principals. And another thing that was very interesting to me was that in these high partnership districts, building representatives not only interacted with each other, kind of their colleagues within the school, they interacted with union reps in other schools around school improvement issues. So you kind of think about schools existing as these independent islands. What we found in these high partnership school districts is it really became a larger learning community, and that learning, that inter-school learning, was being facilitated or carried out through the union reps, the elected building representatives. So these early observations led to some quantitative oriented studies, some of which have been published and some of which are going through peer review. And one, we examined the effects of school partnership on student achievement over time and found that the positive effects of school partnership on this outcome were mediated through denser professional collaboration among faculty. I've since replicated this research using a national sample comprising over 30 school districts, over 200 schools. That research is currently going through peer review. What's exciting to me about this ongoing study is that we have variation in partnership quality, not only at the school level, but at the district level. And one of the things that we find is that institutional alignment, so the strength of partnership at the district level, the strength of partnership at the school level, that alignment there is really important in yielding the strongest effects on student achievement. One other study I'll mention briefly, where these latter studies focused on collaboration within schools and between districts. I also have a publication in the British Journal of Industrial Relations that documented how partnerships shaped information and knowledge sharing patterns between building reps, between schools, and that how this drove basically innovation, the adoption of innovation between schools. So where unions are often characterized as kind of impediments to change and impediments of innovation, one of the interesting and I think practically significant takeaways from the study is that in these high partnership school districts, building representatives took on a much broader role where they really became conduits for the sharing of ideas and the sharing of innovation and improvement strategies between schools. So again, it kind of became this, instead of schools operating on their own, this larger learning community that was facilitated in large part through the role of the union and partnerships in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, John. The next award winner is Saul Rubinstein. John has already mentioned his work with Saul, but we want to honor Saul this year as one of the winners of the Scholar-Practitioner Award. So I'll turn it over to Saul.
Thank you very much, Paul. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I want to focus on an initiative I've been working on for the past 7 years, trying to apply research to practice and focusing in on public school reform and educational policy. This work began with work I did in collaboration with John McCarthy, which he's just described, that showed the positive impact of institutional union management partnerships on school level educator collaboration and on student achievement and on teacher retention, and particularly in high poverty settings. So about 7 years ago, John and I, along with our colleague at Rutgers, Charles Hechter, set out to see, could we actually put that research into practice by attempting to create union management partnerships in school districts across New Jersey and provide an alternative to the failed school reform narrative that had dominated educational policy for the past 2 decades. That failed narrative focused on using market forces through expanding charter schools and vouchers along with high-stakes testing as an effort to reform U.S. public education. And so a first step was we shared our research findings with the leadership of the key stakeholder associations in New Jersey, the two state teachers unions, New Jersey Education Association and the AFT in New Jersey. And we also reached out to the New Jersey School Boards Association, the New Jersey Association of School Administrators, and the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association. And we had a dialogue with them, and they found common ground that they wanted to work together on this idea of an alternative approach to improving public education. And as a result, they formed what they named the New Jersey Public School Labor Management Collaborative. And they've been meeting about every 6 weeks for the last 7 years. And in those meetings, they discuss their common interests. They identify districts that they think would be good districts to do this work in. They plan capacity building, and they help to create a learning network across all the districts involved. What was really important is their intimate knowledge of the school districts, of the union leaders, of the district superintendents, and of the school boards. And they knew who was ready to move in this direction. And so they recruited for us those districts. We started with 6 in 2013. We now have 23 districts that include over 120 schools, employing over 8,000 educators who teach over 77,000 students. And significantly, over the past 2 years, over half of the districts who have joined the collaborative have been high poverty districts, where the majority of students qualify for free or reduced price lunch. So we initiated this by trying to build capacity at the district and the school level, and then we've tried to scaffold this in 2 additional ways. One, by creating a learning network across all 23 districts, in which we meet with them twice a year to exchange information, share experiences, support one another at the district and at the school level, having all the union leaders come together in separate breakouts, administrators in separate breakouts, school board members, in order to create a dense network of collaboration across districts, something that is typically not done. And the second thing we did was we recruited leaders from the early adopting districts. Some of these were principals, some of these were superintendents, some were union presidents, some were school board members, and they have served as a facilitation base for the new districts. They work with us to do the training. They support these districts through follow-up visits, through phone calls, through digital networking throughout the year. So we've, again, in a second way, tried to scaffold this with a dense network across the state to put into practice the research. So it's really a multi-stakeholder and multi-level effort. It's at the state level with the key education associations, and then it's at the district and at the school level in order to figure out a way to grow it and sustain it institutionally. It's also a multi-university and multi-practitioner partnership. And as we try to create this, we really see this as a statewide laboratory that's experimenting with this alternative narrative for public school improvement. The way unions and administrators and school boards and educators work with each other. We're trying, obviously, to influence national education policy. And there's been already a lot of attention from the National Education Association, the AFT nationally, the National School Boards Association, and the National Superintendents Association. We think that this alternative to the neoliberal school reform is rooted in the values of LERA. It's rooted in the value and the importance of institutions, of voice, of democracy, of inclusion, of worker representation. And it is especially meaningful to me to receive this award named for my friend and colleague, Susan Eaton. We met when we were both students at MIT. Susan always emphasized the importance of linking research and practice, and that's what we're trying to do here. So I want to thank you, LERA, for this honor. I want to thank Janice and Paul and the awards committee. I've long felt that when I was at LERA, I was home. And even though it's virtual, I still feel that way. I want to thank Adrian Eaton and my Rutgers colleagues for their ongoing interest and support. I want to thank John McCarthy for being a fabulous collaborator in all of this work. I want to thank Tom Koken and Bob McCarthy for the motivation to do this work. And I want to thank the educators across New Jersey who are at the front lines of this effort. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Saul. Just to review, we're honoring a number of award winners today. We've heard from Jonathan Booth, who received the John T. Dunlop Outstanding Scholar Award for International Significance, John McCarthy, who received the Dunlop Outstanding Scholar Award for National Significance, and Saul Rubinstein, who has been awarded the Susan Eaton Outstanding Scholar-Practitioner Award winner. I apologize if I created any confusion in who was receiving what award. We want to move on now to another award, the 2020 James G. Scoville Best International Comparative IR/HR Paper Award. And that goes to Sean O'Brady of McMaster University. So Sean, if you'd like to say a few words about your work.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, I would just like to say thank you very much to the awards committee, and especially the awards committee for this specific award, which is chaired by Ian Greer. I'm immensely honored, and it is a great pleasure to be receiving this award and to be recognized for this work, especially because I feel like international comparative work is very interesting and helps to provide insights. Once you start doing research in a specific country, you start getting used to the debates within it. But once you start transferring, discussing, drawing from examples elsewhere, it helps to come up with thought-provoking findings to challenge the findings of the work done in your country, your own country, in my case, Canada. I would also like to thank some people who provided me with insightful advice on this paper before I submitted it for publication, especially Gregor Murray, who was my PhD supervisor at the time. I wrote this as part of, this draws from my PhD thesis at University of Montreal. And I would also like to thank Virginia Dolgast, who also provided me with some interesting input on this and helped me to push it towards thinking how it matters for precarious work, because originally the initial idea was looking more at risk rather than precarity. And yes, so I will also add, especially the two Johns have these wonderful stories of what they were doing, when they found out about this, having received an award that made them very overjoyed. I'm sad to say that I was just sitting at my computer doing work when I got the email, so I don't have an interesting story for everyone. I was just looking at the screen and then I saw the little email icon come up, and I looked at it and said, hey, this is awesome, but I don't have a story, so I'm sorry that I can't entertain everyone in the same way that the two Johns did, and very well done and a very interesting way. And so given that this is a best paper award, I think that I'd have to discuss this paper as the significance of this specific paper. And so what this paper is as I was doing my PhD thesis, now I'm tenure track at McMaster, I was looking at a lot of research on precarious work. And I noticed that people who come from different academic backgrounds look at precarious work in different ways and talk about it in different ways. So I was reading, for example, the welfare regime literature that look at the public and private mixes, what companies are doing to provide security to workers and what governments do and how they both mix to impact workers. And they talk about it a lot in the sense that there's generosity, how are you impacting how much workers make, how many hours they have, these types of things. But then I looked at, there was another literature, and you're thinking of people like Jacob Hacker and others who look at it in terms of risk shifts or individualization of risk, meaning that you have a lot of variations that come from time to time. And is that borne by the individual, or is it borne by a collective actor like the state or the company? So I noticed, okay, so you have some people talking about generosity provided by these different actors. You have some people talking about risk collectivization, who's bearing the risks for variations. And then I noticed there was a third stream that would look at it in terms of segmentation, which would be looking at things like employment status or social location like race or age, and looking at how different categories of workers are worse off than others. So you could think of this as atypical work or contract work, or sometimes on the basis of race, and noticing that there's inequality within organizations and across organizations. So what this paper essentially tries to do is it says, well, these people are talking about precarious work in very different ways. But, all of these three dimensions, I call them dimensions, matter to precarious work. So we should actually incorporate the 3 if we want to capture everything that's going on and to understand all the different causes. And so what I do is I basically come up with a framework talking about generosity, the individualization of risk, and segmentation. And I try to explain trends in precarious work across food retail or grocery stores specifically in different countries. And what I did in terms of data is I looked at I conducted nearly 100 qualitative interviews to inform that part. I talked about a long time frame, 1980 to 2016. I looked at collective agreements to trace changes in collective agreement outcomes over this period, and used official documents also to complement what I found from the interviews and the agreements. And I basically, the whole point of the paper is to explain, these big differences, these major trends that happen. And basically, I find that if you look at all 3 dimensions, there are some things that you'd find counterintuitive and some things that would be intuitive about the different countries. For example, even though German workers and European workers in Germany and Sweden, I looked at 4 countries, Canada, Germany, the United States, and Sweden. And the working conditions in the European countries obviously were a bit better. But once you start talking about segmentation in these things, you notice that, well, it's highly segmented in Germany, but unionized workers are better off. If you look in the United States, surprisingly, actually, there are some guarantees that you have in some American supermarkets that you wouldn't even dream of elsewhere in terms of collectivization. So, for example, if you look in New York City and New England, there are these minimum working hour guarantees that they have. So, there are workers there who have a minimum of 16 to 20 hours per week, and it's in their collective agreement that they can't have less. That's scheduling stability is remarkably significant. And just to touch on the point, I look at various aspects: wages, scheduling, and benefits are what I looked at. So anyways, I won't get into all of this, but it's just to say that the idea was of this paper was to look at these different dimensions. It covers a lot of ground to explain the broad changes in precarious work. And why is it significant? I come up with 3 reasons why. One of them is that it understands precarious work as a multidimensional construct, whereas most people talk about it in terms of one dimension. The second piece was that it provides a comprehensive explanation of trends in precariousness to explain the wide varieties of things that are happening in terms of these dimensions and in terms of wages, scheduling, and benefits. And the third thing I think is that despite doing all of this, what makes this a significant piece is it packs in all this theory, it packs in all this complexity in looking at these variations and outcomes. But at the end of the day, it also provides some insights based on it. And one of the things that I thought that was particularly, in terms of a finding that was particularly important in the paper, is that no matter what the dimension was, bargaining centralization was very, very important. So the more centralized bargaining you had, the more likely you were to have superior outcomes across all of the dimensions, more generous outcomes, more collectivization of risk in terms of the employers, and more and less segmentation. And especially in the Swedish case, all-encompassing bargaining in Sweden became very important. The sectoral bargaining in Germany was also very important, even though it was not all-encompassing. And then the chain-wide agreements, which are present in the United States and the parts of the United States I looked at, and the parts of Canada that I looked at, because it's not always, they had chain-level agreements as opposed to establishment level. And the ones where they had establishment level were vulnerable to increased precarity across all of these dimensions. So I know that there are some other award winners that we'll have to that we have to leave time for. So I'll just cut it at that. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for this award. I'm immensely grateful and thankful to be alongside all the prestigious award winners who have won this award in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now switching to two incredible practitioners. Some years ago, not too long ago, LERA introduced a media award, and one of the people who championed that was Ken May of Bloomberg, who always came to our annual meetings, said to learn more about what he wrote about, and also was on our executive committee. Ken died prematurely, and we named the award in his honor. And this year we have 2 winners. I don't know, can you move? do we have a slide on this, Paul? Let me see. Great. We have two winners, Josh Eidelson of Bloomberg and Juliana Feliciano Reyes of the Philadelphia Inquirer. So I guess we'll go in alphabetical order and turn it over to Josh. By the way, my thing to them was to talk about what challenges they face in covering labor issues. So Josh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Janice. Thanks to LERA for this very kind honor, which I'm delighted to be sharing with an outstanding journalist like Juliana, and congrats to all of the award winners. And thanks to everyone joining this conversation, and I'd love to be in touch in the future. At Bloomberg News and Bloomberg Business Week, I write about struggles over rights, resources, and power on the job, including how they play out in litigation, politics, and in workplaces of all sorts. Some of the stories I've spent a lot of time on in recent months include alleged sexual misconduct at the American Federation of Government Employees, the ongoing struggle over who's an employee in California, and the monopsony lawsuit against the UFC. We're talking at a moment that's brought unusual urgency and demand for labor journalism and some particular challenges. One of those challenges is how we reconcile the restrictions the pandemic has imposed on us, from limitations on movement to new family responsibilities, with key aspects of our work, like finding sources, building relationships, and describing what it's like to be somewhere that we personally, physically are not. A second challenge is choosing and executing stories in an environment where, even more than usual, a ton is happening and things are changing very quickly. So the news is a moving target. On all sorts of beats, we journalists these days often find ourselves in the situation of coming across something that would have felt like a major news story if it had happened just a week earlier, but now doesn't, because too many similar things have happened in the prior several days. A third challenge, especially at a moment where many people are newly focused on what's happening in workplaces, is placing what we're seeing in context and distinguishing what's wholly new from what's just been turbocharged by the pandemic. Many of the phenomena we're now discussing existed long before COVID-19, from an approach to OSHA enforcement that's heavily reliant on voluntary compliance by companies, to an at-will employment regime that limits workers' willingness to speak up, to an embrace by unions and alt-labor groups of single-day strikes that are more about disrupting a company's brand image than its production. Each of these has taken on new forms and significance during the pandemic. One of the things we don't yet know is how much what's happening now with each of them will lead to lasting change. Finally, one of the things I wrestle with is the challenge of writing for multiple audiences without too much of an article feeling painfully obvious to some readers, like LERA members, or impenetrable to others. We're always trying to tell stories that can make some small contribution to the discussion already happening on these important issues, while also offering a point of entry into that discussion for people who weren't previously engaged in it. To do that, it helps to have a lot of news to break. And so I'll close by inviting everyone to please reach out anytime with story ideas or tips or information or feedback, and especially with info and tips that we might be first to call attention to or reveal. I'll put my contact info in the chat and ask that anyone please use it. And again, I'm so honored and appreciative to receive this award, and I thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. Let's move to Juliana.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this award. Just a little backstory about how I began at the Inquirer. They hired me to write about workplace culture, and I really wanted to cover labor, and I saw that the labor reporter was taking a buyout and they weren't going to replace her. And so I just sort of snuck my way into the labor beat by pitching different stories. And eventually, like a year later, they were like, okay, you're officially the labor reporter now. So that's why it means so much to me to get this award. So yeah, as challenges, I think I would echo a lot of what Josh says. I think to start, one thing was, so traditionally, the labor beat at newspapers would look like you'd cover a contract dispute or you would cover a strike. And they'd be sort of like hard news in this way. And I've sought to sort of reimagine like what that looks like at the newspaper. So yes, I'll cover a strike, but I'll also sort of look at like, what's the strategy that they're using here? Like sort of go deeper and place it in a historical context and also in like a national context. So that's always important to me, is like to look at like what's happening in Philly and then place it in a broader context. And while like at the newspaper historically they would like on labor they would cover unions, that's really shifted. So I still cover unions, they're still really powerful in Philly, but a lot of the coverage that I do is about non-union workers. So it's about like baristas putting their salaries in a spreadsheet and using that to organize. Or it's about the push for worker protection laws on the local level and how that like ties into the national movement for these kinds of laws. And so a second challenge that researchers such as yourself might understand well is jargon. So when I came on this beat, I was shocked about all the different jargon, like labor law, like words, just like a whole different language that I really had to learn. And I realized that basically like what Josh was saying was like, there's people that know how to like speak this language and then there's people that don't, and you want to write for both of them. So yeah, you're always towing the line between writing for the insiders and the outsiders as well. And there's like this challenge in how do you make something that feels maybe too in the weeds an interesting story. So for example, last year I wrote about how unionized nurses were fighting for successorship clauses in their contract because there had been so much consolidation in their industry. And, you know, when I talk about, like, if I say the words like successorship clause to someone, it's just not the most, it's not the sexiest, you know, it doesn't like pique their interest immediately. But what I found is that if, you know, if you can humanize it, if you can talk about, if you can like inject some drama into it, of course, like in an accurate way. And so the way I did that with that story was looking at, I mean, basically what was at stake was like nurses' jobs, like, and this thing that we're seeing like sweep the city, this consolidation. So like framing it in that way as like the nurses were fighting for these like successorship clauses after a brutal summer in Philly for healthcare workers. I thought, I was pleasantly surprised at how many people read that story. And then lastly, I think something that weighs on me is thinking about the historical context in which I'm writing. And so again, historically, labor coverage in Philly has focused a lot on the loudest people in the room. So, and that's often like the building trades or the Fraternal Order of Police. And that begins to create the sense that labor is just, building trades union leaders who give political contributions to candidates, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So I keep that in mind a lot, and when I think like I feel like part of my project to cover labor at the Inquirer is to complicate those narratives and show a fuller picture of what the labor movement looks like in Philly. Thank you. Oh, and yes, please also send me, so I cover local, but I have a lot of like sources from around the country, experts who help me like understand what's going on and figure out a way to localize it. So I love to hear from all of you as well. And I can put my contact info in the chat. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. And by the way, I'm amazed by how quickly and how well the award winners kept the time. And it gives us some time if anyone wants to ask questions, because we do have time, and that's really great. Well, if no one does, I'll start. I'll encourage people. So with both Josh and Juliana, you know, I think when I look at many working people who at the present time sort of think things are unfair. I'm partly racial, but I mean just generally, that things are unfair, they're falling behind. They sort of realize they have no rights when they're maybe furloughed, a new word, furloughed, as if we're in the army. We can't even describe it. That they just don't even know where to get information about it. And you are such an important source, but you only have so many inches, the old-fashioned column inches. Now, I don't know, it must be words that you can only do. So to me, one of your biggest challenges is how do you give them some background about how this fits in? I mean, maybe we have a couple minutes. Why don't you each maybe think of one story where you were really challenged on this one? Juliana, you mentioned successorship clauses, so you must have had to spend some couple paragraphs discussing how hospitals closed or merged or whatever.
Yeah, actually, when you said that, what came to mind was last year when John Doherty, who's the head of the electricians union here, who is largely thought to be one of the most powerful labor leaders in the region, most politically influential, he got indicted, and there was just all hands on deck. A lot of people were covering this story, and a story that I wrote was about how his indictment was a problem for all Philly unions because of the sense that folks paint unions with a broad brush and just think of unions as a monolith. And so I did a lot of sort of building context around historically how unions have been covered, like the use of union boss and things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, it is hard with not a lot of space, though since we're now in the digital age, it's a little less hard. I get more leeway from my editors.
Great. Josh?
A storyline that is on my mind this morning is the Supreme Court's ruling for the first time that the ban on sex discrimination in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act makes it illegal to fire people based on being gay or being transgender. And that's a storyline that we've done a bunch of coverage of going back several years, and that comes to mind when you raise your question, because from one lens, it's a very technical question about the meaning of words in the 1960s and today. Obviously, it's also a groundbreaking, tremendously significant issue in the workplace and in the lives of millions of Americans and really everybody else. So the stories that I've done on this over the past several years that come to mind, one was a profile of Kai Feldblum, who many here will know, an EEOC commissioner who played a pivotal role in moving her agency, the EEOC, on this issue in a way that then influenced the federal courts and helped to tee up this issue. A profile of one of the plaintiffs who sadly passed away in recent months, Amy Stevens, whose case on her termination for being a trans woman made it to the Supreme Court, and a profile of a lawsuit that settled several years ago against Walmart, arguing that the company's policy of not providing marital health benefits equally to gay people violated the Civil Rights Act. And in each of those stories, what I tried to do was to use a profile of a particular person or conflict with color and personality to draw in a reader and give a sense of the stakes of this debate, and at the same time talk in a way, as we sometimes struggle and always try to do, that is both colloquially clear and also accurate to standards that practitioners would accept. To explain this question of, can you tell someone it's not okay for them to be a gay employee or a transgender employee without implicating the question of their sex and their gender? One of our stories in Business Week even used emoji And as the headline said, if you are anti, and then we had 2 woman emojis, are you anti, and then we put 1 woman emoji. So our graphics team, as well as we word people, try to find ways to meet this challenge. And as the story twists and turns and evolves, we have opportunities to keep trying again to engage more people.
By the way, if anybody wants to ask a question, just make sure your mic is on and start speaking, because you'll come up on the screen as the speaker. Anyone?
This is Tom.
Go ahead, Tom.
Can I make a comment? This is to Josh and Juliana and all of your colleagues in the media. I don't think there's ever been a more important time for your work than right now in our field. You know, we all hope that there will be a change in government in November, and that if that happens, that labor law in its fullest sense, labor and employment law, are going to be on the table for discussion. And some of us have been veterans of unsuccessful efforts to change labor law in the past. And it's only because it's always been a private labor versus business matter. And it's not something that the public really understands, really engages, and really starts to put pressure on elected officials to do something. And your role in this process of getting the word out from researchers and on the debates to the American public is going to be absolutely essential to any hope of success in bringing about fundamental changes that are needed. So I just want to let you know how important the work you guys are doing is always, but particularly at this historic juncture, and appreciate it. Congratulate you on the award, and all of you and your professional colleagues are doing a great public service for us right now.
Thank you very much, Tom.
You know, I just want to add something to Tom. What really strikes me also is as you frame it, I was thinking about the Supreme Court decision this morning, which I have not read yet. But sometimes people look at it as, oh, that group is protected, you know, versus this group isn't. And frankly, actually, sometimes I have not a problem with that, but, you know, we have a list, and then you have to think, well, who's not on the list, right? And it could be framed, which I think is as it's a recognition that behind Title VII is the thought that we're supposed to be a just society based somewhat on merit, and that everybody should have an equal shot at a job if they're qualified. That's essentially the value. And so the Supreme Court, I suppose, those in the majority must have said whether or not Congress was specifically thinking about transgender people in 1963, which frankly is, in my mind, very unlikely because it wasn't talked about at all. So we're talking about all the members of Congress. When you think about the principle and what was meant by that, then it, you know, should be covered by this statute. But it's this whole question. I think many of us, and Tom, I think, is talking about this, sort of struggle, like we have these values, and over time, some of it gets put in these boxes, like this really narrow focus instead of these, you know, wider focus. If we want to make society more fair, like how do we have our values expressed in laws, that sort of thing. So it's I think, as Tom said, a very important discussion that's going to go on in, I hope, the next couple of years. Anyone else? Very quiet audience. Okay. Paul, do you want to wrap it up?
Well, we have 2 more award winners to
Okay.
recognize. Do you want to do those, Janice?
Well, they're not here with us today, right?
Well, I think they are.
Oh, are they? I didn't realize they were because I've been talking so long.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and introduce. We asked them to attend. We didn't ask them to make remarks, but we do want to recognize them. So if they just say hello, they'll appear on the screen, and and be recognized. Tymon Sloczynski of Brandeis University is one of the winners of the LERA ILR Review Best Paper Competition Award. Tymon, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hello, and thank you very much to the committee for selecting my paper. Thank you.
Yes, congratulations. And the other award winner in the Best Paper competition is Richard Benton from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Richard, are you with us?
Yes, hello. Thanks very much to everyone in the committee for the award. I especially want to acknowledge my co-author, Ki-Jung Kim, who's a graduate student at the University of Illinois and contributed mightily to the paper. So thanks very much.
Yeah, congratulations, Richard. Well, in closing, I just wanted to say a word or two. You know, LERA is an association of scholars and practitioners who come together because of shared interest. But in my experience, LERA is much more of a community than other professional associations that I've been associated with. And I think one of the best things we do is recognize the work and contributions of other members of our community. And the awards committee of LERA has the happy chore of recognizing people, we will, throughout this meeting, different award winners have been recognized. The awards roundtable today was meant to recognize specifically several of the award winners. But we'll have another such award presented just in a few minutes at the time of the presidential address. So I'd encourage all of you to zoom in for both the presidential address and this significant award. Thanks everybody for coming to help us recognize our award winners, and we'll see you at other parts of the meeting.
Great. Thank you. By the way, I'm going to add one thing to everyone. We need nominations always, and particularly, I should say to the journalists, to the media people, feel free. You're not a member, but you can send in nominations to us. You know more than we do about what goes on around the country in locales where we're not. Thanks. Thank you. See you later today, we hope.